In this section, we want to look at a couple of common examples where macros may make your programming life a little bit easier on the Express console. So we want to take a look at just a few things that we've gathered from experience or from Express users who have said, hey, this macro helps. We're going to cover a few of those, as well as just some tips and tricks to help you get the most out of the macro functionality on the Express consoles. One of the things that we find commonly used macros are like a channel check operation. So what I'm doing here, and you can look on the screen and see macro 1 and macro 2, I have a command, and this may not make perfect sense immediately, but it will when we see it running. I have macro 1 is at 0, 0 plus full. And then I have macro number 2 is at 0, 0 minus full. And I've got those assigned to macros 1 and 2, so they're right here on the M1 and M2 key. So what does that do exactly? I'm going to go back to stage and I'm going to take 1 at full, and let's say I want to run through my channels to do a channel check at the beginning of my show. So I say 1 at full, and now I can hit macro 1, which is going to say at 0, 0 plus full, which will turn channel 1 off and bring channel 2 up to full. So I can just simply step through my channels and go, and then the at 0, 0 minus full will actually reverse through the channels if I want to be able to go backward and forward. So that's a common use. At 0, 0 plus full or at 0, 0 minus full is the macro. Back into macro editing, setup 8. And macro number 3 is a commonly used macro, which is the save to disk macro. And what that does is it is the setup command. 3, the third list option down, is disk functions. Enter opens up that. 1 is write all to disk. Enter, and then a please confirm, enter, and then it will write to the disk, and then I have the stage button hit so that the console will return back to the stage display when it's finished saving. So let's see how that looks when I run, and that's my macro 3, so I'm going to hit macro 3, and we get the to disk in process occurring. And when that is finished, because the macro is taking its time, it will return back to stage, indicating that it's done recording to disk. So that's another common use. Another one that we can do, and I'm going to go back into macro editing. I'm going to change here what macro 1 does. Commonly used are like a plus % and a minus %. So like if I take a channel to 75% and I say, no, I need to increase that by 5 points, instead of typing on my keypad at 75 or picking the next one up, I could write a macro that is at and then the plus key 5 times. So I'm going to hit 1, enter, and I'm going to use my soft key 3 to delete everybody. I'm going to say at and hit the plus key 5 times. Enter macro to finish that. I'm going to do the same thing for macro 2, but I'm going to do at minus 5 times. So I'm deleting at minus 5 times. I could make this 6, I can make it 10, I can make it whatever I want, but 5 is a nice number. So now I have stage. Let's say I take channel 10 at 50%, and I want to increase it. No, now I want it up 5 points. I hit macro 1, it's up 5, macro 1 again, now it's up 5 more, macro 2 decreases it by 5 points. So there's a nice quick way to get up 5 and down 5 on a particular channel. Another thing to remember about macros is not necessarily what they can do, but how you can use them. In your setup display, under options, settings, option number 10 is a power-up macro. And a power-up macro is a macro that will run whenever the board is turned on. So this is useful if you want to automatically turn on, say, some work lights, or run a queue, or bring up some house lights, or something when the board is turned on. So somebody who's not experienced in bringing up a queue or something can come in, turn the board on, and when the board is booted into its software, it will simply run a macro that will bring on some lights or perform another function or read a show from a disk or something. You can do that as a power-up macro. A few other things that we want to be able to do with macros, and this pertains to queue operations. If I can go and I want to create a macro, and now this is where I can use macros that I don't necessarily need hard buttons for. So I'm going to go into my macro editing, and I'm going to do macro 101. So I'm going to say 101, enter, and now I'm learning 101. And maybe this is a macro that I want to use to execute a subroutine that needs to play with another Q that I am pushing go in my CD fader pair. So what I want to be able to do is, let's say I have a subroutine in Q number 1. So I'm going to type Q1 and I'm going to hit the AB go button. And you can see that my macro now says Q1 go AB. And that is macro 101. I'm going to hit enter macro. Now, what I can do from stage is, let's say I want that subroutine to start playing with Q12. So I simply hit Q12 and I hit my link button. And remember, we talked about link in another section that had to do with Q parameters. But one of the options here with link is to link it to a macro. So I'm going to hit enter macro after I hit link. And I'm going to pick, as it says, link, select the macro number, macro 101. And now you can see that here in my Q list that Q12 links to macro 101. What this allows me to do is when I play Q12 in my CD fader pair, Q12 executes in the CD fader pair, and subroutine number 1, Q1, starts playing in the AB fader pair. So I only have to hit the go button one time, but both Qs start playing simultaneously. So that's a way that I can trigger those things. Related to that, I can, in macro editing, in macro 201, I want to go ahead and on-bump a submaster that is containing my effect. And in this case, I have an effect running in my submaster number 3. So I'm going to hit more soft keys, and I'm going to hit on-bump, soft key 1, and it's going to ask me the submaster number, sub 3, enter. Now you can see here that my macro 201 is on-bump 3. And I'm going to enter this, and then I'm going to create a macro 202, which is an off bump for the same thing. So now I have two macros, 201 on bump, 202 off bump. Now what I can do is in Q10, I can do the same thing. I can link to enter macro 201, enter, and then I can do Q11 link to 202. Now when I run Q10 and I execute that Q, it's going to start my effect running, and the Q runs here. And then when I'm finished with that Q and I want to stop the effect, I simply hit go, and Q11 runs and the effect stops. So that is a way that I can use macros and linking to macros to execute commands in my submasters. So those are a few common examples of how macros are used on your Express console, and also ways, little shortcuts and tips and tricks that macros can do to help make your programming on the Express console a little easier.